The night that split our small town open started just like any other Friday in late October 2022. I was 17 then, a junior at Franklin West High, working a weekend shift at the neighborhood grocery store to scrape together money for my first used car. Everything was ordinary classes, part-time work, scrolling on my phone until I fell asleep. But that Friday was different. A traveling carnival had rolled into the old strip mall parking lot at the edge of Madison, the kind of run-down corner people mostly forgot existed. When those bright tents went up and the Ferris wheel lit the sky, the whole town turned electric. Cheap thrills, greasy food, and promises of a night that might actually feel like an adventure. I went with my 3 closest friends, Riley, who lived next door since we were kids, Marcus from my AP history class, and Jace, who always knew how to get us into places we probably shouldn't be. We pooled what cash we had, tips, leftover lunch money, and for once, our parents gave us the green light to stay out late just as long as we stuck together. We got there a little after 8 p.m. The carnival was heaving, parents herding toddlers away from the wilder rides, older kids jostling for spots at the ring toss and shooting galleries, the smell of funnel cake and fried onions clinging to our jackets. We blew our first hour screaming on the zipper, burning cash on rigged games we knew we'd never win, and hyping each other up for the main event Riley had been dreading all week, the haunted maze. It loomed at the back of the lot like a massive black barn surrounded by cheap fog machines that made the gravel lot look like a graveyard. Recorded howls and shrieks spilled from its entrance every time a new group stumbled out pale and laughing. Marcus was all big talk about how nothing would get under his skin. Jace kept poking fun at Riley for how hard she was clutching my hoodie sleeve. When we got to the front, the guy tearing tickets didn't help. He looked like he'd smoked 3 packs a day since middle school, cracked voice tattoo sleeves half hidden under a battered hoodie. He gave us the usual warnings: don't break anything, don't touch the performers, stay on the marked path. His smile was missing more teeth than it had. Inside the first corridor hit us like a punch pitch black except for strobes that fried your depth perception every time they blinked. Riley jumped so hard she almost ripped my sleeve off. We fell into a tight huddle, Jace leading with false bravado, Marcus behind him with that laugh that sounded just a little too forced, Riley glued to my side. At first it was the usual junk rubber spiders, cheap animatronic corpses that lurched out on wires, scratchy speakers playing creaking doors and chains. We all screamed, then cracked up at ourselves. That safe, silly kind of fear you can laugh off when the lights come back on. But the further we pushed through, the stranger it got. The rooms stopped feeling cheap. The props looked too real, hospital gurneys with old yellowed sheets, walls smeared with something that smelled sour beneath the chemical fog. A cold draft seemed to follow us. I kept catching movement out of the corner of my eyeshadows that slipped away before I could really look. The performers were the worst part. They didn't jump out with chainsaws or plastic knives. They watched. A woman in a nurse's dress drifted behind our group for what felt like forever, her breath raspy like an old cassette tape, never blinking when you met her eyes. In another hallway, a child in a hospital gown crouched under a flickering exit sign, humming a song that stopped dead the second you looked directly at her. When I turned my head, she was gone. It was Riley who first whispered that something felt off. We'd been inside at least 20 minutes, way longer than the outside of the building should allow. The maze twisted in on itself, but somehow always led deeper. We hadn't seen any other group in ages, which made the air feel heavier than the fog could explain. Then came the hospital chamber. It was bigger than the other rooms. Pale green walls, cracked and yellowed metal trays scattered with fake scalpels and syringes. The stink of disinfectant and rust made my throat itch. On one side, a line of old gurneys shapes under stained sheets that might have just been lumpy props, but nobody wanted to lift a corner to check. That's when he stepped out, a tall man in pale scrub surgical mask, covering half his face except for his eyes, too sharp, too clear, locked dead on Riley. Unlike the other actors who skulked or hissed or screamed, he just walked forward like he owned the floor. He didn't break character because there was no character to break. He stopped inches from Riley and reached out his hand. His voice was calm. Too calm for this place. "There's an issue with the power. We have to get you out right now. Come with me." We all froze. Marcus tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. Jace muttered, "Dude, just keep moving." But the man didn't even blink at him. Riley laughed nervously the way you do when you're trying not to embarrass yourself. She took half a step back. He stepped forward with her. He reached again, gently, but firm fingers brushing her wrist. "It's not safe in here. You need to come now." His tone was still calm, but his grip locked like a vice when Riley tried to pull away. She looked at me, wide eyes, panic cracking through. That's when I knew. The cold, the silence. None of it was an act. Jace was the first to move. He grabbed the man's wrist. The stranger didn't flinch. He just tugged Riley toward a door tucked behind an old oxygen tank, an unmarked fire exit we hadn't noticed before. Marcus found his voice then. He stepped in yelling, but the man didn't bother with him, just stared at Riley like we didn't exist. Then Riley screamed. It cut through the canned howls and rattling chains like a blade. Real. Raw. The three of us lurched forward at once, arms tangling, fists grabbing. The man didn't break stride. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd drag her through that door anyway. It was Marcus who cracked it. He swung a plastic IV pole prop like a bat. It connected with the stranger's shoulder. Jace and I ripped Riley free. I saw the man's eyes up close, then glassy, too wide. No costume could hide the panic that flickered there when he heard real footsteps pounding toward us. He let go, turned, and vanished through that fire door into the darkness behind the maze. By the time the real carnival crew found us a manager with a flashlight, 2 security guys huffing from the sprint, he was gone. They shut the entire haunted maze down that night. Cops, flashlights, squad cars, and the foggy lot. They showed us grainy camera footage, the same man ducking into a staff trailer hours before we even bought our tickets. He'd stolen a costume, learned the layout, found the exit, nobody checked. They never found him. Riley's wrist was bruised for weeks. She changed her phone number after reporters kept calling. The carnival packed up before dawn, just taillights vanishing down Highway 12, while we sat in our parents' living rooms trying to make sense of what almost happened. It wasn't the gurneys or the props that kept me up after that. It was how easy it was for him to slip inside the part where we expected to be scared. How easily we let our guard down, trusting that the horror was fake, safe fun. We thought the maze would terrify us for a few minutes, and we'd come out laughing. We didn't know we'd find something worse waiting behind the black walls, something real. I still wonder how many people he's tried it with since. How many more haunted houses swallow screams that don't echo back? Would you still walk in? My job doing security for traveling fairs across the South brought me to Tulsa that late September, and what I found there still sits heavy on my chest. 7 years in this line of work since leaving the Marines, I'd fallen into the rhythm. Break up drunk arguments, find kids who'd wandered off with a balloon instead of their parents, keep rival vendors from tearing each other's stalls apart. It didn't pay great, but it kept me on the move, which suited me better than some fluorescent-lit office. At 31 single, I liked drifting town to town, no roots to pull me back. That week, our show had set up at the Tulsa County Fairgrounds. Early autumn heat still clung to the days, and families poured in by the hundreds, kids clutching snow cones and squealing at the Ferris wheel. Most of us who did this circuit year after year knew each other's faces, each other's tells. We knew who'd lend you a cold beer after closing, who'd try to shortchange the ride inspectors. There were old codes out here, unwritten but ironclad. The pair everyone loved most were the Cunninghams, Ray and Lorna. Ray was this mountain of a man with calloused hands that carved the tiniest, sweetest wooden trains you ever saw. Lorna stitched patchwork quilts so perfect they looked like heirlooms from another century. For nearly 20 years they'd trailed this same loop, with the fair always snagging a spot 2 rows off the main drag tucked right between the bottle toss and the fried Oreos stand. Their trailer was this dented silver Shasta that Ray had turned into a rolling wood shop. Inside every shelf and drawer was packed with scraps of cedar and jars of buttons. Ray would hunch over his carvings for hours, thick fingers tracing smooth curls of wood. Lorna would hum old folk hymns while her needle danced through fabric. They had coffee for anyone who stopped by, and more than once I'd found a carved horse slipped into my jacket pocket during patrol. Tuesday night things cracked. I was circling the games alley near closing when I heard voices echo behind the concession sheds. New blood. 3 guys who'd joined our run maybe a month ago had set up a stall, hawking cheap earbuds and knockoff sunglasses. The ringleader called himself Curtis Bleach Blonde Hair Bad Tattoos, that looked half-finished. His shadows, Lee and Devin, played at being muscle, but they were just echoes. Laughed when he laughed, glared when he glared. Since day one, they'd bent the rules, staying open late, hogging space, turning their music up until I'd threatened to cut their power. That night, I found Curtis jabbing a finger at Ray's chest near the supply trailers. Ray looked like he wanted to fold that finger in half, but just clenched his jaw and held still. I got close enough to catch Curtis accusing Ray of stealing a bundle of extension cords. Said old-timers shouldn't block up premium space that fresh vendors deserved. Ray tried to explain they'd been there forever. They'd never needed to lift so much as a light bulb. Curtis didn't care, voice rising, spit flying, calling Ray a geezer who ought to pack up. Then Lorna appeared, arms folded tight under her quilted shawl. She offered to help them look for the missing gear, a peace offering that just made Curtis smirk and tell her to mind her knitting. I cut in, then voice steady badge clipped to my belt. Told them to sort it in daylight or take it to management if they had real proof. Curtis stared at me for a long second, eyes glinting like a raccoon in a trash can. Then he spat near Ray's boot and said this wasn't over. As they stalked off, Ray thanked me in that soft rumble of his, but the way his shoulders slumped made me feel like I'd done nothing at all. Wednesday morning, the air over the Midway felt wrong. I clocked in at 6:45 expecting the usual racket vendors banging metal poles into place, generators humming. But halfway down the 3rd row, I found only an emptiness that made my stomach dip. The Cunningham space was gone, wiped clean. No display shelves, no painted sign, not even a stray wood chip in the grass. Their hookups coiled neatly, water tap shut, like they'd been plucked clean off the map. Clusters of other vendors hovered nearby, pretending to busy themselves with bunting and prize toys. When I asked, they just shrugged or looked through me. Pete, the manager. 50 years in the fair game, face like leather, eyes like cold soup, claimed Ray and Lorna had pulled out overnight. Said they needed a break, maybe headed back home early. But Pete's eyes flicked sideways every time I asked where home was. By lunch, I drove to the KOA park on the outskirts where most fair workers stashed their rigs. The patch where the Cunninghams always parked sat empty except for wheel grooves in the dust and a handful of wood shavings scattered like confetti. A retiree tending the laundry room said he'd seen their trailer hitched to a dark pickup around 3:30 a.m., but he couldn't recall the license plate. I thanked him anyway, but the chill in my gut just sank deeper. Thursday morning, I stopped for Bad gas station coffee 15 miles east of town. 2 truckers near the window were swapping stories about a trailer blaze on the highway overnight. One said it looked like an old camper half melted behind a Shell station out on Route 66. I left the coffee on the counter and drove straight there. I knew that shape before I stepped from the truck. The twisted chrome siding, the dented wheel well, the stubborn scrap of awning still fluttering. Cops had roped off the lot with crime tape that whipped in the wind. Fire crews were stomping through wet ash. An ambulance idled nearby with its rear doors open. A detective named Sergeant Nguyen stood by the remains notebook in hand, eyes red, like he hadn't slept. He didn't hesitate when I told him who I was to the victims. Said accelerant residue pointed to arson deliberate. Worse blood inside. Everywhere it shouldn't have been. On the bunk. On the wood paneling. Scattered shards of glass. Fist-sized dents in the tiny cupboard doors. He said they'd likely been killed before the fire. That the flames were just the cleanup. He asked if they'd had trouble with anyone. I told him about Curtis Lee Devon, how they'd crowded Ray that night behind the sheds. Nguyen's pen scratched the paper like it was carving something out of bone. When I finished, he shut his notebook and told me quietly he'd keep in touch. When I got back to the fairgrounds, the mood felt rotten, like a place abandoned by its own echoes. The regulars moved in slow, skittish circles. Curtis and his sidekicks still stood behind their table of knockoff headphones, but they weren't brash anymore. They were calm, triumphant. Curtis caught my eye and mouthed, "Accidents happen," his teeth bright behind his grin. The others, they avoided me now. Mrs. Felder, who used to share pie with Lorna on slow nights, just shook her head when I asked what she knew, then turned and wept into a stack of plush toys. Friday at dawn, Sergeant Nguyen called. He'd gone looking for Curtis's crew. Their stall was gone. No crates, no canopy poles, no paperwork in the fair's books. Pete said they'd decided to head west, but his voice was hoarse like he'd been shouting at ghosts all night. Nguyen told me vendors clammed up when pressed. One old guy whispered that the fair handled its own problems, that those who stirred the wrong dust got buried quiet. By Sunday, the Tulsa Fair tore down and rumbled off down Route 75 like nothing had happened. Like Ray and Lorna had never sold a toy or poured a single cup of coffee. I tried to bury it too, but nights turned bad. Dreams of Lorna's humming voice flickering through flame and black smoke. I spent hours combing old news clippings, found stories of a candy cellar blown up by a propane leak in Missouri. A game booth guy who vanished outside Wichita, last seen arguing with New Blood. Same pattern, same silence. The Cunningham's file got boxed up and labeled cold case. Sergeant Nguyen got reassigned downstate. I sold my trailer and took a job running forklifts in Amarillo, but every time a fairground flickers neon on the horizon, my gut knots. I think of Ray's rough hands, Lorna's quiet songs, and how sometimes, if you lean too close to secrets on the road, you don't get to pack up and leave. The fair packs you up instead. And if you ever hear a rumor about the fair that feels too dark to be true, think twice before you ask. Tell me, would you still dig deeper? Or would you keep your mouth shut? Let me know below. I'll read every single reply, especially yours. It's been 5 years since that night in Willow Creek, Oregon, and there are still mornings when I wake up half expecting to hear his footsteps in the hallway outside my room. I was 19 that summer, old enough to feel grown but still dumb enough to think nothing bad could really happen to us, in a town so small it didn't even have its own movie theater. When the traveling carnival rolled in that August, it felt like a miracle. Back then, I worked part-time at a beat-up car wash on the edge of town, scrubbing mud off logging trucks for cash I kept stuffed in a coffee tin under my bed. Most nights after work, I'd meet up with my two best friends, Nolan and Bryce. Nolan was the loud one. Tall mop of brown hair that fell into his eyes, the kind of grin that made adults think he was up to something even when he wasn't. Bryce was different. He looked like a linebacker, but had the attention span of a crow always chasing something shiny, dangerous, stupid. He'd jump from a bridge just to see how deep the water was. We'd been riding out the last lazy weeks of summer the same way we always did, windows down, cheap gas station coffee, in hand Nolan's mom's beat-up Toyota, sputtering down back roads at midnight. Mostly, we just talked about how much we hated Willow Creek, how we'd all be gone soon. Bryce would go first, probably drop out halfway through and hitchhike to California. Nolan swore he'd get a baseball scholarship somewhere far. Me, I didn't know yet. Maybe that's why I let that night happen. The carnival set up shop in an empty gravel lot behind the old hardware store. Faded tents, crooked stalls, the faint smell of burnt sugar and diesel hanging over everything. It was cheap and a little sad in daylight, but at night, when the lights came on, it looked like another world. We'd gone once, already bought wristbands we couldn't afford, laughed until our stomachs hurt. But Bryce kept talking about how different it would be after hours, how the Ferris wheel would look with no kids screaming, no rigged games, just us and the whole sleeping town below. I should have known he'd make it happen. He always did. It was a Thursday. I'd just finished my shift grease under my fingernails, too tired to argue when I climbed into the back seat and found Bryce practically bouncing in his spot. He leaned over the seat, breathless. Tonight's the night, man. No lines, no tickets. Just us and the wheel. Nolan laughed, told him he was insane. But even then, I think we'd already decided. We parked the car behind the old feed supply shed. The fence was ridiculous chain link sagging under the weight of blackberry bushes. Padlock so rusted, Nolan popped it with a tire iron he'd found in the trunk. The lot was so quiet you could hear the tilt-a-whirl creak when the wind shifted. The Ferris wheel towered over everything, all cold steel and loose cables swaying gently in the breeze. We slipped inside like we'd done it 100 times, laughing too loud, pretending not to look over our shoulders. Bryce led us straight to the Ferris wheel's rickety booth. He was already flipping switches by the time Nolan told him to slow down. Sparks popped once I swear my heart stopped. But then the motor groaned to life and the giant circle started turning like it had been waiting for us. No lights, just the whir of gears and the cold air brushing our faces as we climbed into the last open car. Willow Creek looked so small from up there. A scatter of porch lights and the faint glow of the mill out on the river. Nolan took pictures with his flip phone blurry, but somehow perfect. Bryce leaned out just enough to make my stomach drop, arms spread like he could catch the whole damn sky. For a while, we just sat there letting it spin. We talked about where we'd be next year, which felt so far away it might as well have been another lifetime. Nolan joked about coming back someday, buying the carnival just so he could keep the Ferris wheel forever. Bryce didn't say much. He just smiled at the horizon like he could already see himself somewhere else. When the wheel finally slowed to a stop, Bryce pointed at the funhouse. "One more," he said. "Come on, you know it's gotta be creepier in the dark." The funhouse sat under a sagging sign that used to say Laughland. Half the bulbs were busted the clown face over the door, missing an eye flaking paint like it had been crying for years. The door wasn't even locked, just swinging slightly in the breeze. Nolan went first, flashlight flickering off cracked mirrors and hanging fake cobwebs. I followed, half listening for the sound of boots behind me. Bryce was humming under his breath, tapping the mirrors like he was testing for secret doors. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. The hallways twisted in on themselves, lined with warped glass that turned our 3 reflections into 30, all of them moving wrong. Then we heard it, a scraping metal on metal deep enough to rattle my teeth. I stopped so fast Nolan bumped into me. Probably old gears or something, he said, but his voice was paper thin. Bryce didn't care. He pushed past us, beam of light darting ahead, bouncing off fiberglass walls and clown faces grinning in the dark. He was laughing when he turned the corner, then nothing. We rounded the bend, but the hallway was empty, just a dead end with a wall of cracked mirrors. No Bryce, no footsteps, just our own faces looking back at us from every angle except his. We called his name until my throat felt raw, checked behind every trick panel, every false wall. The scraping sound was gone, but the silence was worse. Nolan tried his phone, but the signal was dead inside all that warped glass. We were in there so long the batteries started dying. The carnival beyond the wall stayed silent like it didn't even know we were there. When we stumbled back outside, the sun was threatening the edge of the hills. Bryce was still gone. So was his grin, his laugh, the last dumb idea that felt like freedom. We called the sheriff. They brought dogs. They tore the funhouse apart, board by board. Nothing. The manager swore he locked up tight, swore he'd seen no kids sneaking around, said maybe Bryce ran off on his own. But we knew better. A week later, they found his phone buried under a tarp on the kiddie coaster we'd never touched. The last text sent to his sister half an hour before we ever climbed that fence. The carnival packed up and left that same afternoon. Next town, new poster, same rides. Sometimes I dream about that last spin on the wheel, the way Willow Creek looked small enough to crush with my thumb. Sometimes, if I stand too close to a mirror at night, I swear I see him behind me, grinning, waiting for me to come find him. If you'd have gone in there with us, would you have made it out? Tell me below so I don't feel so stupid waiting for an answer that's never coming. The smell of funnel cakes and gasoline still turns my stomach even 4 years later. I was working security for Hollow Pines Fairground when it happened, one of those drifting carnivals that pop up in half-empty shopping center lots for a weekend, before slipping away to the next forgotten town. It was a Thursday late September. We were just hours from opening night, and the air had that crisp edge that makes you think fall might finally stick around this time. I'd been with Hollow Pines for almost 7 years, then knew every ride operator by first name, every old diesel generator by its sputter and cough. I even recognized half the same families who trailed us up and down the state. Around 4:15 p.m., I was doing my usual perimeter walk, checking fence panels, making sure no neighborhood kids had found a loose bolt they could crawl under. The carousel music was playing its test loop, that endless tinny tune drifting on the breeze. It was the same as any setup day, until I saw them. 2 girls, maybe 17, lingering behind the line of supply trailers near the south fence. One of them, a redhead in a baggy denim jacket, had her phone held high, filming a selfie video as they giggled their way past a stack of rusted metal drums. The other dark hair, piled in a sloppy bun, kept pulling at her friend's sleeve, half dancing to the music. They weren't inside the fence, so technically, not my problem. But I watched anyway. Long enough to memorize their faces without realizing I'd done it. They looked like kids who should have been at the mall food court, not hanging around a half-assembled carnival's back lot. When I passed by again 20 minutes later, they were gone. By 5:30, we were nearly ready to open. My radio crackled with Hector's voice. He was manning the front gate that day. He said he'd heard weird banging from inside Trailer 12, our oldest storage unit. The kind that looks like it should have been scrapped 20 years ago. Trailer 12 was a relic. 40 feet of rust graffiti and warped floorboards. It held spare signage, old fiberglass funhouse props, off-season prize stock, the graveyard for things we couldn't bear to toss, but didn't really need. I headed over, cutting behind the tilt-a-whirl. That's when I saw it. The chain we looped through the door latch was dangling loose, brushing the dirt with each lazy sway. I'd locked it myself that morning, same as always. There were footprints too, 2 sets pressed deep in the soft dirt behind the trailer. Small sneakers, same size as those 2 girls. The banging had stopped by the time I stood in front of the door. I should have gone in. But my radio barked again, Jamal yelling for backup near the Ferris wheel. Hydraulic leak. Messy. I hesitated just long enough to let my gut settle. Then I locked the chain back up tight and jogged off to help Jamal patch the leak before the kids showed up. Sun was low when my phone buzzed. A transfer from 911. The dispatcher's voice was so flat it felt rehearsed. We have a call from 2 juveniles claiming they're locked in a trailer at your location. Said someone's outside dragging metal. My pulse hammered so hard I felt it in my teeth. I already knew which trailer, which girls, which footprints. I didn't wait to reply, just ran. My boots hit the gravel so hard I nearly tripped twice. This time I didn't pause. I tore the chain off and threw the latch wide. The sun poured in through the half-open door, slicing through the stale darkness. Inside, the air was wrong. Too heavy, like a closet that hadn't been opened in years. It smelled like new paint and something sweet that turned rotten at the edges. I called out, no answer. Pushed deeper. Boxes of plush toys towered like cardboard tombstones. Old clown heads leered from shelves overhead. Halfway in, near the back, I saw the first sign they'd been real. A cracked lavender phone case on the dirty floor, stickers peeling off in rainbow sparkles, and next to it, deep scratches in the plywood curving back toward the door like claw marks. But no girls. Just silence and that sweet rot sticking to the back of my throat. I stumbled out just as the first red and blue lights washed over the fence line. 3 patrol cars, 1 battered sedan with government plates. Detective Morales. I'll never forget her. Coffee breath and eyes that looked like they hadn't closed in days. She made me repeat every step. Where I saw them. When. How long I'd waited. Did I know anyone who'd let them inside? Forensics tore through that trailer like wolves. They found the second phone wedged under a stack of old fair banners, screen spiderwebbed last call to 911 at 6:03 p.m. Fresh scratches on the inside of the door down where the rust met the floorboards. But no girls. No sign of how they'd gotten in or out. We shut Hollow Pines down that night. Didn't even let the funnel cake fryer finish warming up. Every trailer checked. Every ride cracked open. Dogs. Drones. Volunteers with flashlights combing the creek bed behind the lot. Nothing. The girls' names were Riley Carter and Zoe Vega. Juniors at East Meadow High. Good kids. Softball captain. Yearbook editor. Their last post was a short clip. Riley laughing Zoe's voice behind the camera. Found a cool spot. Come on. I still hear that line sometimes. Forensics pulled 1 video off the second phone, 2.5 minutes of pitch black and labored whispers. Around the 1-minute mark, the sound that still wakes me up sometimes. Metal scraping metal. Slow, heavy, circling the outside of the trailer. A chain rattling just once. Riley's voice barely a breath. Zoe? There's something under the floor. But Trailer 12 didn't have a floor hatch. We pried it up, board by board. Concrete underneath, solid. No crawl space, no drain, nothing. On the fourth day, the fair owners let me back in to grab my things. The police had finished with the scene, so they said. It was just past dawn. Fog pooled between the trailers like spilled milk. When I passed trailer 12, I heard it again. That scraping, slow, steady. But this time it was inside. I froze. The chain was still sealed with police tape unbroken, but the sound didn't care. It dragged on, metal on wood. I called it in my voice, shaking so bad I bit my tongue twice. By the time the squad car pulled up, the noise was gone. Inside they found what they always find, nothing but stale air and boxes stacked like gravestones. Except for one thing, 2 sets of prints in the dust, small sneaker soles toe to heel, leading away from the door to the far wall. And then, nothing. Like the girls stepped into solid plywood and never came back out. The Hollow Pines Fairground closed trailer 12 for good that month. Said it wasn't safe, insurance, liability. We all knew better. I work overnight mall security now. No carnivals, no trailers, just late-night deliveries and echoing food courts. But some nights when the AC hums just right, I swear I hear that drag metal on metal just out of sight. And sometimes I wonder if Riley and Zoe are still down there wherever there is, dragging their way back up through splinters and concrete. If you hear scraping in the walls tonight, maybe check. Maybe don't. Just don't turn away too fast. Would you keep searching if you heard them too? Tell me below. I'll be reading long after closing time. The call came in at 12:03 a.m. on a Friday night in August 2011. I just parked my cruiser outside my tiny rental on the outskirts of Eldridge, Missouri, hoping to catch 4 hours of sleep before my next shift. Dispatch crackled through about a missing kid Haley Monroe, 15, hadn't come home from the annual county fair. Her father was beside himself on the phone. Said Haley had promised she'd be back by 10. I remember letting out a tired breath, half expecting it to be another teenage stunt. Maybe she'd snuck off behind the funnel cake stands with her boyfriend. God, how I wish that's all it had been. I turned the cruiser around engine, still warm, and headed straight back toward the station. The radio lines were already buzzing, deputies from 3 counties getting pulled in. Haley wasn't the type to run. Honor roll at Eldridge High Clarinet and the marching band, volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends. Her best friend, Kelsey Dunn, told us they'd gone to the fair with 4 other kids from their math class. Ferris wheel, fried Oreos, ring toss, the usual August fair routine. Around 9:15, Kelsey said Haley wanted one last spin on the rotor, that old spinning barrel ride that pins you to the wall. Kelsey was still feeling sick from the tilt-a-whirl and decided to wait near the exit gate. She watched Haley hand her ticket to the operator, a skinny guy with bleach blonde tips and a ripped Slayer hoodie. That was the last anyone saw of her. We got his name off the fair's employment list, Jeremy Knox, 31. Been with Crescent Valley Rides for half a year. When we went to knock on his trailer the next morning, it was empty. Mattress, perfectly made. No clothes, no personal junk. His rusty pickup was gone too. The fair's lot manager, an old-timer named Bud Jensen, said Jeremy had closed the rotor down around 11:30, but no one had seen him after that. Calls to his burner cell went straight to voicemail. Too damn convenient. Girl steps onto his ride and vanishes. So does he. We tore that fairground apart. Checked the rides, the fields behind the livestock barn, dragged the fishing pond by the woods. Nothing. 3 days and 2 kids riding their bikes cut through the drainage ditch behind the old drive-in and found Haley's purse snagged in some weeds. Her school ID was inside along with a broken hair tie and the cloth friendship bracelet Kelsey had made her. Tucked in the side pocket was a folded napkin with a number scribbled in pencil. We traced it to a disconnected landline from a roadside inn about 20 miles east. The motel had been shut down for years. When we dug into Jeremy's work file, it turned out half of it was garbage. Fake address, fake references social that came back to a dead man. Prints were useless, no matches in any system. He didn't exist. The state troopers tried to track him through ticket sales and carnival supply vendors, nothing. The FBI took a look, wrote up a basic profile, but they didn't find a trail. By winter, the case was marked inactive. Probable runaway. That's what the official paperwork called her. Haley's father called our office every Sunday without fail. Every Sunday I told him there was nothing new. Crescent Valley came back the next summer. And the next. Different faces, new managers, fresh coats of paint on the rides. But the rotor stayed. Same squealing metal, new neon lights. You could feel parents clutch their kids' hands tighter as they walked past it. Most still rode it. Some pretended they didn't know. Some of us could never forget. Then it happened again. August 2014. Almost 3 years to the day. Another 15-year-old girl, Morgan Phillips. Same county fair. Same story. Out with friends, decided on one last spin on the rotor before heading home. Her cousin waited outside, phone in hand. Watched Morgan climb the ramp, hand her ticket to the operator, a woman this time. Bright purple hair, a sleeve of old-school tattoo flash on her arm. When the ride stopped and the kids stumbled out giggling and dizzy, Morgan wasn't there. The operator swore up and down she'd never seen Morgan board. The cousin swore she'd watched her hand over her ticket. They argued for precious minutes. Minutes. I'll never forgive myself for losing. By the time word hit dispatch, I was already pulling into the lot siren, screaming over the carnival music. I found the operator chain-smoking behind the prize booth. She looked ready to bolt. Kept telling me she was new, only been on the job 2 weeks, didn't know the ride well. When I asked who trained her, she hesitated. Mumbled about a skinny guy with bleached tips and a torn hoodie showing her the ropes her first day. Said he'd vanished after that. I swear my stomach turned to ice. I called every unit within 50 miles. Locked the fair down tight. Nobody in, nobody out. We ripped the rotor open like a tin can. Fire rescue brought saws cut through panels the size of small doors. It wasn't in the manual, but someone had hollowed out a crawl space behind the main controls, maybe 3 feet wide, just enough for a man to squeeze through. Caught in the rough metal inside were a few strands of long red hair. Morgan's family confirmed hers. The hatch led under the ride's steel base through rusted support beams all the way to a gap in the fence near the drainage ditch, the same place Haley's purse turned up. We followed the path, hearts in our throats. No sign of Morgan, but under the debris, by an old generator, we found a carnival uniform stuffed in a plastic bag, Crescent Valley logo from 2011. Security cameras at the corner gas station showed a blurry figure hauling a duffel bag across the field that night. Not enough pixels to ID him, but the silhouette matched every old witness statement we had. We closed the fair for 4 days. Dogs, drones, volunteers combed every acre of farmland for miles. No Morgan. The FBI took the case back, convinced the same man was moving with the rides, always waiting for the next fairground to set up in some unsuspecting town. DNA from that hidden crawl space matched Haley's. But there were other samples older than both disappearances from girls who never made any missing persons report we could find. The rotor itself had been bought and sold by 4 different traveling outfits in 20 years. God knows how many towns it passed through. How many kids climbed inside, how many never stepped back out. It finally broke when a gas station clerk in Oklahoma flagged down a trooper. said a nervous guy with bleached hair had been coming in late nights for snacks, always paid cash. State police parked on the edge of the lot for 3 nights straight. On the 4th night, they watched him slip into a rundown camper at the far end of an abandoned trailer court. His real name turned out to be Richard Novak, decades on the carnival circuit under fake names, false applications, and half a dozen hair colors. They found Morgan alive, locked in a makeshift root cellar under that camper. She'd been missing for 6 days, cold, hungry, but breathing. Novak confessed to taking Haley and 4 other girls no one even knew to look for. Only Morgan came home. They dug up fields in Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma quiet country roads that kept his secrets buried for far too long. Haley was found in a shallow grave behind a line of rotting hay bales, exactly where Novak said she'd be. Sometimes I drive past the fairgrounds when the lights are up and the rides spin. The new rotor gleams with bright paint and fake cheer. But every time I see kids lining up for that ride, I remember how they built a door where no door should be, and how if you listen hard enough when the music fades, you might still hear footsteps behind the wall and something waiting in the dark to open it again. If you ever rode something you couldn't quite trust, tell me below. I read every story, especially the ones that come after dark. The traveling fair that summer in Maple Hollow, Wisconsin, honestly felt like it was running on borrowed time. Half the stalls were slapped together from plywood sheets and faded canvas banners, and the Ferris wheel groaned so loud you could hear it squealing from the gravel lot out front. But for people like me and Lena, who just graduated high school and were stuck in town with no real plans, it was something to do besides driving circles around the gas station. She'd picked up a couple late-night shifts working the balloon dart game, the one tucked near the back fence by the funnel cake truck that always smelled a little burnt, no matter how fresh the oil was. That Friday night in late July, I wandered over to help her pack up. We were both bored and restless and pretending we were too old to care about cheap prizes, but too young not to love winning them. It was that weird hour when the fair had technically shut down, but a few strings of bulbs still flickered over empty prize counters. Most of the workers were gathered by the greasy food trailers laughing over leftover corn dogs. Lena still had to box up the stuffed animals and pull the tarp over the booth window, so I stuck around. We ended up tossing stray darts at a half-deflated row of balloons, seeing who could pop the quietest one without making the tarp rustle. Dumb, harmless fun. It felt like we'd carved out our own little pocket in that run-down fairground. When we were done, we drifted a bit toward this shabby old funhouse set up near the back gate, a leftover from some Halloween haul patched up with strips of black tarp and plastic mirrors that warped your reflection in all the wrong ways. A faded chain looped around the entrance poles, but no real lock. Lena said she'd always meant to peek inside, so I ducked under and held the flap for her. The place smelled like stale air and old plywood. One emergency bulb blinked overhead, and the mirror's warped panels screwed to plywood bent our shapes in ways that made us look like strangers. We took dumb selfies in the glass. A couple minutes in there felt too warm, too cramped, so we ducked back out, giggling at our monster faces. Back at her booth, we took a few more shots on her phone, Lena perched on the prize shelf like she was running a luxury boutique of sad plush animals. I didn't notice how weirdly still everything felt. The music had died. No chatter, no echo of the Ferris wheel motor, not even the whir of distant generators. It was just our footsteps scuffing at the gravel and the soft creak of prize banners shifting in the warm breeze. We joked about it. Said, if the world ended, this would be our kingdom. Lena pretended to lurch after me like a zombie, while I tried to catch a panoramic shot of the rows of abandoned stalls. The next morning, we crashed at her parents' place, sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor, passing the phone back and forth while finishing cold cereal from the box. Most of the pictures were garbage, blurry, half faces, flash glare in the mirrors. Lena trying to photobomb every shot with her tongue stuck out. But then we hit one that made her stop scrolling. It was just me hunched by the balloon shelf, looking back at her. But tucked in the dark gap between the corner post and the funnel cake stand, there was a shape. Zooming in made it worse. A pale face paint smeared across the mouth, dark rings under the eyes that made it look half skeletal, like bad clown makeup left to melt off in the summer heat. The next shot he was closer. Same white smudge grin, same sunken stare, only half turned away like he was trying to slip behind the prize trailer, but not trying too hard. In 2 more shots, he got closer, still drifting just into the background, never front and center, never waving. Just there, if you knew to look for him. Lena got real quiet. She flicked her phone off so fast you'd think the picture was burning her fingers. I tried to brush it off, maybe a fair worker playing some cheap prank or a prop left over from the funhouse. But I felt that tickle in my spine. The guy didn't look staged. The paint looked rubbed raw like he'd been wearing it for hours. And he didn't look at us. His eyes angled past the camera like he was focused on something else entirely. By noon, we were back at the fairgrounds. The rides were half taken down already. We found a guy in a battered orange vest near the ticket shack, Ray the Night Watch skin like tanned leather, and a thermos glued to his hand. When we showed him the pictures, he squinted like he wanted to joke it off but couldn't. He told us to hang tight, then came back with a younger guy in county security blues. They herded us inside the cramped manager's trailer where an old desktop played back the grainy CCTV footage on loop. There he was. 10:17 p.m. A pale smear stepping around the dunk tank, crouching behind the funhouse exit ramp. He never ran, never even glanced at the camera. He'd freeze if someone passed too close. Wait until the corners were empty, then drift again. For nearly half an hour he circled our stretch of booths. Sometimes he'd squat behind a stack of spare plywood and peek around like he was counting the empty rows. The worst part was watching him stop by the funhouse door, the same flap we slipped under, just standing there while we were inside a foot away. So close the camera caught the flicker of paint on his cheek when the bulb overhead swung. Lena wrapped her hoodie strings so tight her knuckles turned white. I kept thinking about how we joked about being alone, about the dead quiet. Maybe it wasn't the fair shutting down. Maybe it was him standing there waiting for the noise to drain away. They took our statements, burned copies of the files, gave us that sympathetic nod that says, "We'll look into it," but really means, "Don't hold your breath." Nobody recognized him. Not the temp ride crew, not the food truck guys who sometimes let drifters help for a quick buck. The next week slipped by with nothing. Lena deleted every picture, even the good ones. She said she didn't want that painted face popping up on her screen by accident. I kept one. Just one. Not out of morbid curiosity, more like a reminder that sometimes you only spot the danger once it's gone. The fair tore down by Wednesday. The funhouse got loaded onto a rattling flatbed and disappeared down Highway 54 before dawn. Lena and I drifted apart not long after that, not because of him. Just life tugging at different threads. But sometimes if I catch myself alone near a shuttered strip mall or a muddy, empty lot after dark, I still feel it. That hush in the air, too clean to be natural, like something is waiting in the corner of my eye, not looking at me, but watching just beyond the frame. And if you ever find yourself hearing that kind of silence, the kind that swallows the world whole, maybe check behind you. Just once, or don't. But if you do, come back and tell me what you saw.